An angry silverback blocked the tourist's path. The camera caught a miracle. The first thing the camera captures is not the movement, but the stillness. A stillness so unnatural, it feels like the forest itself has stopped breathing. The air hangs thick, saturated with the damp, almost metallic scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. It clings to the skin like a second layer, warm and insistent, as though the jungle is trying to pull everything into itself: sound, light, even fear. A low mist curls around the roots of towering trees, and somewhere in the distance a bird calls once, then falls silent, as if it too senses something wrong. And then he steps forward, a massive silverback. His fur catches the filtered sunlight in streaks of deep charcoal and molten silver, each strand heavy with moisture. His chest rises slowly, powerfully, exhaling a breath that seems to ripple through the humid air. There is a scent around him, musky, primal, edged with something sharper, something like tension or warning. In front of him stands a lone tourist, frozen. The camera trembles slightly, capturing the micro-movements, the way her fingers twitch, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the glistening sheen of sweat forming along her temple. The path behind her has vanished into shadow. The path ahead is blocked by something that feels less like an animal and more like a force of nature. The silverback does not charge. He does not retreat. He simply stands, watching. There is something in his eyes, not rage, not fear, something far more complex, something that doesn't belong in a moment like this. And just as the tension stretches to its breaking point, something happens. Something no one expected. Something the camera was never meant to understand. But before we step deeper into this moment, before we unravel what truly happened in that suspended breath between human and beast, take a second right now. If this story finds you, if it stirs something in your chest even before it fully unfolds, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because stories like this don't just happen in one place, they connect us across distances we can't always see. Now, let's go back. Back to the beginning. The forest that morning carried a strange kind of weight, not the violent kind that announces itself with storms or thunder, but a quieter, more intimate heaviness, the kind that settles into your lungs and lingers there, as if the world is holding on to something it hasn't yet decided to release. The light filtered through the dense canopy in fractured beams, painting the ground in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. The smell of moss and damp bark rose with every step, rich and earthy, almost sweet in its intensity. This was not a place meant for carelessness. And yet, for years, humans had walked these paths, carefully, respectfully. Among them was Daniel, a seasoned guide whose life had become intertwined with the rhythms of this forest. His skin carried the permanent warmth of the sun, his hands roughened by years of navigating branches and terrain. He knew the subtle language of the jungle, the difference between a warning rustle and a harmless breeze, the meaning behind a sudden silence. And he knew the silverback. They called him Koro. Koro was not just any gorilla, he was the leader of his troop, a figure of immense presence and quiet authority. His movements were deliberate, his gaze sharp, but there was something else about him, something that Daniel had noticed long ago. A kind of awareness, an intelligence that went beyond instinct. Over time, a fragile understanding had formed between them. Not friendship, not in the human sense, but something close enough to trust. Koro had learned that these particular humans meant no harm. Daniel had learned when to step back, when to hold eye contact, when to lower his gaze. There was a balance, a rhythm. Until that day. The tourist, her name was Elena, had arrived just 2 days earlier. She carried with her the scent of unfamiliar places, clean fabric, faint perfume, the sterile sharpness of city life. It clashed subtly with the organic depth of the forest, making her presence known in ways she couldn't perceive. Still, she listened carefully. She followed instructions. And yet, something shifted. It began with Koro's absence. For 2 days, he had not appeared. The troop remained, quieter than usual, their movements more guarded. The younger gorillas stayed close to the females, their playful energy replaced by an almost uneasy restraint. Even the air seemed to notice, carrying a faint edge of unease beneath its humid warmth. Daniel felt it. He couldn't explain it, not fully, but there was a tension threading through the environment, subtle yet persistent, like a note slightly out of tune. And then Koro returned. But he was not the same. The first sign was his posture, where once he moved with grounded authority, now there was a stiffness to him, a hesitation in the way he placed his weight. His breathing, though still powerful, carried a faint irregularity, barely perceptible, but enough to unsettle someone who knew him well. Then there was the smell, not the usual musk of dominance and territory, but something sharper, almost acidic. The scent of stress, of pain, Daniel noticed immediately, and so did the others. The troop reacted in ways that were subtle yet undeniable. They kept their distance, their eyes tracking Koro with a mixture of recognition and caution. Even the forest seemed to respond, its usual symphony of sounds thinning into something more fragile, more uncertain. Something was wrong. Days passed. Koro grew more unpredictable. He would disappear for hours, only to return with a restless energy that rippled through the group. His movements became sharper, less fluid. His patience, once immense, seemed to fracture in small, almost invisible ways. The experts were called, veterinarians, trackers, behavioral specialists. They observed from a distance, their conversations hushed but urgent. The signs pointed to stress, possibly injury, maybe even illness. But without getting closer, without risking escalation, they could not be certain. And then came the moment the camera would later capture. Elena had strayed, not far, just enough. A bend in the path, a shift in perspective, a momentary separation from the group. And suddenly, she was alone. The forest felt different there, quieter, the air heavier, as though it had thickened into something almost tangible. The light dimmed, filtered through a denser canopy, casting everything in a muted greenish hue. And then he appeared. Koro stepped onto the path, blocking it completely. His presence filled the space, not just physically, but emotionally. The ground seemed to absorb his weight, the air bending around him. His eyes locked onto Elena, and in that gaze was something that defied every expectation. Not aggression, not fear, but intensity. Deep, searching intensity. Elena froze. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, loud enough to drown out the distant rustle of leaves. The scent of her own fear, sharp, salty, unmistakable, mingled with the dense aroma of the forest. She remembered the rules. Don't run, don't scream, don't challenge. But nothing in those rules prepared her for this. Koro took a step forward, slow, measured. The tension coiled tighter. Behind the camera, Daniel whispered urgently, his voice barely cutting through the heavy air. The team watched, helpless, every instinct telling them this could turn catastrophic in an instant. But Koro did not charge. He came closer. closer than ever before. And then he stopped, right in front of her. Their breaths mingled in the humid air, forming a shared rhythm that felt almost surreal. Alina could see the details now, the texture of his fur, coarse and damp, the faint tremor beneath his skin, the glistening sheen in his eyes. And that's when she noticed it. A wound, hidden, partially obscured beneath the dense fur along his side, swollen, infected, the source of the scent, the source of the change. Koro shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, his expression, if it could be called that, softened, not in submission, not in weakness, but in something that felt intentional, as if he was showing her, as if he wanted her to see. The realization hit like a quiet shock. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a message. Back with the team, everything changed. The experts moved quickly, their urgency now guided by clarity. A plan formed, careful, calculated, respectful of the delicate boundary between intervention and intrusion. Hours later, under controlled conditions, they approached. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of antiseptic mixing awkwardly with the natural richness of the forest. Koro resisted at first, his strength immense, his instincts still sharp. But there was a limit to that resistance, a moment where something shifted. He allowed it. The treatment was precise. The infection was severe but manageable. A hidden injury, likely from a territorial clash, had festered, altering his behavior, pushing him into a state of constant discomfort and agitation. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly the forest breathed again. Koro returned to himself. His movements regained their fluid strength, his presence settling back into that quiet, commanding calm. The troop relaxed, their energy lifting, their interactions warming, and then came the moment no one had planned for. Elena returned, carefully, respectfully. The air that day was lighter, touched with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of fresh leaves and distant rain. Sunlight broke through the canopy in warm, golden streams, illuminating the clearing with a softness that felt almost intentional. Koro saw her, paused, and then approached, not with urgency, not with tension, but with recognition. They stood there again, in that same space where everything had once balanced on the edge of fear. But this time, the air felt different, lighter, open. Their breathing aligned, slow, steady, shared. And in that quiet synchronization, something passed between them. Not something that could be measured, not something that could be explained, but something undeniably real. A connection. A moment of understanding that existed beyond language, beyond species, beyond logic. And as the camera rolled, capturing this fragile, profound exchange, it became clear that what had happened that day was not an anomaly. It was a glimpse into something deeper. Because perhaps intelligence is not just about thought. Perhaps empathy is not limited to humanity. Perhaps there exists a kind of awareness, a sixth sense, that allows living beings to reach across the boundaries we believe define us. Koro had not acted out of instinct alone. He had sought help. He had chosen to trust, and in doing so, he had revealed something extraordinary. That even in the wildest corners of our world, where survival often demands distance and caution, there are moments when connection becomes stronger than fear. Moments when understanding finds a way. And maybe, just maybe, those moments are not as rare as we think. Maybe we've simply forgotten how to see them. So as this story settles within you, as its quiet weight lingers in your thoughts, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever felt that unspoken connection with an animal? A moment where something passed between you that didn't need words? If this story moved you, if it opened even the smallest window into a different way of seeing the world, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in the unseen bonds that connect us all. And in the comments, tell us your story, because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we feel long before we understand them.